Es un gran honor estar con ustedes en esta noche y platicarles acerca de una historia que continúa realizándose o surgiendo en el Medio Oriente y que desgraciadamente, desafortunadamente, tiene como consecuencia la pérdida de vidas humanas. Así es que si podemos empezar, quisiera que leamos en fuerte. And how many deaths will it take till he knows that too many people have died? Pónganse el audífono. Israel and Syria have fought 3 major wars since the creation of Israel. These are the Independence War in 1948, the Six-Day War in 1967, and the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Although Israel resulted victorious in these wars, it landed a very heavy price on human lives that were lost. Israel and Syria share a small border of 83 kilometers in the Golan Heights. But in the area of Quneitra, we have seen the fiercest battles between the rebel groups that now govern Syria. Then came the Arab Spring, before this war erupted, and winds of hope were running through the cities of the major cities of the Arab world, including Israel. But unfortunately, as it reached Syria, revolution never goes as is planned, and a major war began. And this war brought destruction to the cities and rivers of blood through all the city streets. The war in Syria is now on its 6th year, and the death toll has topped over 550,000 people, including women, children, elderly, and men. It has resulted in the destruction of all the medical services that they have, and the displacement of more than 6 million citizens, and another 4.7 million are listed as refugees in the different neighboring countries. Recently, Antonio Guterres, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, stated, "We are witnessing the greatest humanitarian disaster of the past 2 decades, requiring the largest ever humanitarian appeal." Our hospital, the Galilee Medical Center, is located barely 9 kilometers from the border with Lebanon and approximately an hour drive to the border with Syria. We serve a community of 600,000 individuals, and it's like a microcosmos of what it represents Israel, serving the Druze, the Muslim, the Christian, and Jewish communities. In 2013, I was invited to become part of a project led by Professor Jan Sustiel to develop the 7th neurosurgery department in Israel. Little did we know that 2 weeks after, we will start receiving Syrian casualties of war. So, by March 2013, Israel started to receive these injured militants or rebels or combatants, and they were crossing over the border in close relation with, or coordination with the UN forces and the Israel Defense Forces. Once they arrive to Israel, they go to this a field hospital in an undisclosed location, because it has been done under secrecy to also give the opportunity to save their lives, but also when they go back so that they don't, the Syrians are not treated as traitors. Once that they are stabilized, they are transferred to 3 major hospitals in the northern region: This includes the Civ Hospital in the town of Safed, Poria Hospital in Tiberias, and the Galilee Medical Center in Nahariya. This is the only hospital in the northern region that has a department of neurosurgery, which means that we receive the most severe traumatic injuries. Over 2,000 Syrians have been treated in my hospital. Although these are enemy combatants, and at some point are our enemy, we had to rethink what we're going to do with our fellow men. And we put everything aside, and it was time to treat the suffering beings that are coming toward our hospital. The mechanisms of injury that these combatants have are mostly related to combat, but there is a 15% of injuries that are related to other causes like car accidents or accidental falls. Now, that's a little bit crude, but some of these patients receive field treatment in the field. Many times, it's not the best treatment that the person should receive. Like, unfortunately, this combatant that had a major injury in his head, and in the field, they placed a catheter into his head, and it passed through his brain, and unfortunately, we couldn't save his life. Or this young man, a 21-year-old combatant, who received a severe head injury, and the only thing that he had in his head was 3 stitches trying to hold the brain from popping out. These are the 2 patients that initially arrived to us. This is one high commander of the rebel forces from Syria that unfortunately died from his head wound. And this, the first one that we admitted to our department, had a blast injury in his head, and when he regained consciousness, something that we were expecting that it would happen, but we didn't know how it would be, he got very anxious, and he was willing to take off all the lines that he had and jump out of the window because of fear of being tortured and eventually killed. And this was shared with many of the rebels that came to our hospital. But fortunately, it wasn't long until they started to feel more comfortable being treated in Israel. But any major war doesn't stay with just soldiers, rebels. Then it came the time to receive children also, like the one here in the middle. Now, once that they come after the trauma unit, these patients go either to the operating room or to the intensive care unit or to our hospital ward. And the major injuries that we saw is shrapnel wounds, pieces of bone fragments or metal into the head, skull fractures, and the most devastating ones are the gunshot wounds to the head and the blast injury. Now, from these 2,000 Syrians, 390 have been treated in my department, most of them with very severe traumatic brain injuries and many times with traumas in other parts of their body. And I want to just focus on these patients that have the gunshot wound to the head, because these are so severe, and in the literature, they have a high mortality rate. We can see that in the civilian population is about 55 to 90%, while in the war-related, because they have helmets, it's about 44 to 90%. Now, the rebels don't have helmets. They have kefias. They have something that wraps on their head, and it's no protection at all. Now, what the bullet does to the brain is that the positive wave expands the brain, and then comes a negative pressure wave that brings it back in. And it's like if we shoot to a canister full of water, the bullet passes, we see the forces building up, and eventually it explodes. This happens to the brain also. And here, what we developed quickly to treat these injuries is to take off half of the skull, whether on the side or whether on the front, to allow the brain to expand outwards and not push inward and press the brainstem and the major vessels and eventually causing the demise of the patient. The results that we had are astounding, and we're still amazed of what we got. Because we got only a 10% mortality, although the patients come in deep coma. And we've had 18%, 90% that survived, 30% that went back talking and walking, but 12% that eventually will recover somehow. But unfortunately, I cannot bring them back to continue their follow-up because of the inherent situation in the field. I want to present you two cases so that you can understand what we deal with. This is a young woman, M, 23-year-old, that she was abused by Army soldiers and shot in the head at close range. She was brought to us in a comatose state, and the Army immediately received her at the border and brought her to us. You can see the bullet passing through her brain. She went to surgery immediately, and we can see the entry wound, the exit wound. This is the time that we're removing the bone to give weight to the brain to expand and cleaning a little bit of the dead tissue in her brain. 17 days later, this is what we got. The woman is returning home. Thank you. She went back home fully alert and with no measurable neurological deficit. Now comes the story of a rebel fighter who suffered a head injury by a bullet shot by a sniper. This is the entry point in the forehead. These are the eyes, the ear. This is the exit wound in the back of his head. We can see the path of the bullet in this CT scan. And at surgery, we see how the bullet entered, came out, and we see the brain pushing outwards the skull, opening the fracture. And here, we have already taken out all the bone and cleaned the tissue that was dead. Here we can see what I explained before. The brain moves outwards and leaves the midline and the brainstem without any problem. And what happens next, 77 days later, the patient is going back home. The patient stays with us about 40 days in the hospital in our department, with 24 days in the intensive care unit. And the results also astounding, 18% mortality rate. Now, these are my kids. And it has been an honor for me to treat the fellow men in the hour in need. And I promise to them that I will raise my voice to help them cope with all that is happening to them. Now, many people have asked me in the media if I think what I'm doing or my team is doing is going to bring any difference or is going to change the status quo between Israel and Syria. And I can only say that I don't think so. Why? But I'm sure that we're demolishing borders, bringing them down, and I'm sending back ambassadors for peace. I stand here. Thank you. Thank you. I stand here, humble, honored by the opportunity to treat my fellow men. And I've been deeply touched by the stories of those that I could save, those that I tried to, but I couldn't, and for those that have already departed their earthly being. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This is what it is. For the future of the Middle East. Thank you.